Welcome to the Woven Energy Podcast on Real Practical Shamanism with me, Joseph Sikora, and as always, Damon Smith. We are here to talk about shamanism from the ground up. And in this episode, we are going back to stage 4 of shamanic technique. And Damon and me have been chatting a few times through the week. And, you know, I think the first thing we're going to do is try and put you all off listening to this episode as much as possible. That's what we're talking about, wasn't it, Damon?
It's a good idea, Joe. Good idea.
In the immortal words of Damon Smith, shit is about to get deep. So I think what we're going to do first is just say we're going to be exploring energy changes on a really sort of deep level here. And so it's going to be quite important that you have got to a certain stage with your stage 3 of shamanism. So we have a few episodes to list off really that are kind of required listening before continuing on to this episode. So should we list those out first, Damon, and just have a quick chat about what we're about to do?
It's not just required listening, it's required practice. Yeah. So like Joe says, this episode may make no sense whatsoever. If you're a brand new listener, we're going to apologize in advance. This episode is going to make virtually no sense to you, hopefully, that we can remedy that. So we want to put some, point you, I mean, if you're brand new, you should be way back to episode 1. One of the things with the Woven Energy podcast, it's a linear podcast. The ideal thing is to start at episode 1 and then listen to every episode, episode 2, episode 3, and then up to catch up to where we are. That's ideal.
I'm going to just chip in there, Damon. It is linear, but it's also not at the same time. So the core episodes of this podcast are linear. You need to start at the beginning and just go through them. But we do have various just easier listening episodes interspersed into the podcast, which we will be continuing to do. And you can just listen to those whenever you want. That's absolutely fine. But yeah, most of the episodes are definitely linear, especially the ones that are targeted towards shamanic technique, right? So
yeah. So in terms of what you should be listening to as preparation for this, then we did write out a list of episode numbers, didn't we, Joe? So
I've got them here, and I've got them here. Yeah, and what I'll do is I'll also rename them in our podcast episodes as well, so that we can. I'll sort of put the code at the end of each of the episode titles for stage 3 as well. But basically, stage 3 is episodes 32, 34, 35, 36, 38, and 41. There's also one in the 20s as well when we first introduced stage 3, which might be worth looking at as well. I haven't got the podcast up at the moment, but I think it was about episode 24, something like that. But it was like introduction to stage 3. So those are required listening and required practicing.
Coolio.
To make sense of this, I mean, feel free to listen, of course, but it's not. It's gonna make a lot more sense if you've gone over those. So we
with
have
the disclaimer
a
out of the
patron
way.
to thank.
Yeah, we have a patron to thank, which is our long-standing friend and patron, Mika Vikberg. Thank you ever so much, sir. Mika has increased the support that he gives us. That's fantastic, especially coming from somebody like you, mate. It really means a huge amount. And, to have massively skilled people becoming patrons of our podcast is a bit humbling. And but hopefully to others, it lends us a little credibility that what we're saying isn't complete nonsense. So thanks ever so much, Mika. That's fantastic.
Yeah, thanks so much. And also, anybody out there who wants to support us, you can go to, patreon.com/wovenenergy. And if you support us over there, you can have some extra bits and pieces which are scattered in and amongst the posts over there. So there we are. Damon, we were talking about going deep into certain energy changes. Can you just put that into context before we get into the real meat and bones of it?
Yeah, no problem. I mean, as we've discussed many times, I think even from the very first episode, we mentioned that shamanism has a lot to do with what we might translate into English as energy. And to be honest, we've said there's a lot of problems with translating different words that we use, like spirit. There's a lot of, we did a whole episode on that, yeah? A lot of issues with translating certain words from more shamanic languages like Mongol, like maybe Japanese and Chinese as well, into English. There are issues with translations. One term that I don't really have a problem with using is the word energy, and that's partly why it's in the title of the podcast, if you like. And shamanism has a huge amount to do with energy. So, and I think the way that we normally use the word energy in everyday English isn't really a bad way. It doesn't really have any nasty cultural baggage built into it in the way that other words that we might use, like spirit, for instance, do in our
other
language.
Than it's been kind of adopted by the woo-woo crowd a bit, feeling the energies and all this kind of stuff. But,
so we can get around the adopted by the woo-woo crowd bit by saying we are talking about energy, not mystical energy. We're talking about energy. That's the first kind of disclaimer, if you like. So one of the things that we've said is there are some sort of basic energy changes, and the last few episodes we've been talking about them. So just to quickly recap, you have the sort of mutual support of energy streams, Tolka. We have the idea of confluence, which would be Nigdech. We have the idea of adding more weight into a line of energy, or adding more oomph, if you like, into a pre-existing line of energy, Totolun. We have the introduction of new energy into the weave, which would be Asach. We have the sort of coming and going, rise and fall, compression and expansion, heavy and light. Those sort of phase-like changes of energy that are like the waves breaking on the shore, rolling back and then breaking on the shore again, coming and going. Shurug. We have this kind of circling or spiraling kind of recycling of energy if it's spirit dance. Let's talk about all of this. We could talk about it in the context of any group of shamanic techniques. Let's talk about this in the context of spirit dance, the circling and recycling of energy, which is Egeldech. We have cutting one line with another or stopping the flow of energy quite suddenly, the infamous Tyrach of Tyrach fame. And we have the kind of drawing out lines of energy, or the weight of other lines, or more specifically, allowing a potential for some kind of energy change that is already there within the weave to express itself, which would be either Tengas or Chirech, depending on your kind of how you're talking about it. These are Mongol words. But to avoid confusion or adding unnecessary complexity, we decided sort of offline that we're going to use Amabella terms for these sort of deep dive episodes. I think dealing with, there's certain advantages to using Mongol words or Japanese words indeed or Chinese that are going to manifest themselves, but we're going to try to use English or words that we picked out as part of the Amabella effort to represent these changes. So we're going to try to stick to Amabella type of terms. If you don't know what Amabella is, there is a whole episode on it. Is that right, Joe? Did we do more than one episode on it? I can't remember.
We did. I think we did. We definitely did one episode. It was one of those things that we started and then we realized that it was a huge mountain to climb to explore Amabella. So it is on the list of things to go into, because it's a fantastic lens into the world of shamanism, which really helped me personally. But essentially it's our way of teaching shamanism to unsuspecting people, not not telling them that it's actually shamanism, isn't it? It's like
exactly.
a really nice way in for the more logical, Western, rationally minded person is how I like to think about it, because it's super practical, right? And also another thing about the whole woo-woo energy thing was all of those 8 energies that you just described, we spent copious amounts of time physically practicing those in partnerships, right? We got to experience those energy changes in a very real way. It's not like it's just, there's nothing woo-woo about it, basically. And you can feel those energies completely. And it's something that we can also go into, but wow, there's just so many things to go into now.
So just to quickly recap in terms of the things that we've covered, the 8 sort of changes we've covered so far. Tolthgo would be jag in our Belder terminology. Nugdech would be meld. Sotulin would be torrent. Asach would be kindle. Shurug would be squall. Egeldech is Gaia. Tyrach is shard. And Tingus is Mia. So those are the words we're going to be using for those 8 that we've already explored. We also kind of recognize that these deep dive on energy level 4 energy changes are going to be a little heavy going. We'll try to make them fun and interesting, but they're going to be heavy going. So what we're going to do is intersperse them with more general interest sort of episodes. And some of the earlier ones of those general interest episodes will be to go back over the energy changes the 4 energy changes that we've covered so far from the other context. So we did the first 4 from a sort of solo spirit dance type of context, and we did the second 4 from a Torun Butchig context from multiple partner spirit dance kind of context. So we'll probably have 2 episodes swapping them the other way around. We'll do the first 4 from a partner dance kind of concept, and the second 4 from a solo spirit dance kind of concept. And there will be 2 of the interspersing episodes between these rather heavy ones. Yeah.
And the energy changes you've just mentioned, the 8 energy changes, can we think of those as core? It's difficult, but can we think of those as core fundamental energy changes?
You can if you want, Joe.
Yeah, of which now we're going to go into more detail on different energy changes.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, it's very, very hard for people like us who are deeply steeped in the Chinese martial arts to stay away from that model, the I Ching model.
Yeah.
But we don't really need to stay away from it because there's nothing in it that isn't shamanic. It's just, what are we talking about? So we had some offline discussions, and one of the things that I didn't want to say is, and hopefully if you've been listening to our podcast for a long time, you'll understand why I didn't want to say it. I didn't want to say it, okay, now we're going to start working on the 64 hexagrams. I didn't want to say that because that's the wrong way to look at it. We're going to look in some detail at energy changes that can go on in your spirit dance. I sound like a stuck record saying that there are other ways to express your level 4 shamanic technique. You can use it with a drum, you can use it with a staff, you can use it with homiluk, you can use it all kind of ways. Automatic writing, as we discussed very recently. There's a ton of ways you could do level 4, but I'm going to just stop saying we're talking from the point of view of spirit dance here. Spirit dance, as you probably gathered, is kind of my number 1 portfolio of shamanic techniques. It's not a shamanic technique, it's a portfolio of. And what we're going to do here is explore spirit energy changes for spirit dance, which are immediately relevant to drum technique, for instance. But we're just not going to spell out the drum technique because we've only got so much time, so much to get to. So let's set the context.
We could do a whole podcast on one energy change.
I know. And then we could do a whole podcast on one for dance, one energy change for dance, one energy change for the drum, one energy change for homiluk, and a podcast. It's infinity, isn't it? Infinity podcast.
It would be really nice to concentrate and focus on the spirit dance, but also just slip in about the drum.
Maybe.
For me personally, just being selfish, I would love to know about all this stuff on a deeper level. directly related to the drum as well.
Let's start with the drums. So the first energy change I want to talk about is persist. Every energy change has a couple of major aspects to it. There's the change that's actually going on, which tends to be one of those, what Joe was referring to as core energy changes. And then there's the context in which that change is occurring, the microcosm and the macrocosm, if you like, in esoteric terms. And that context is also changing. There are also changes going on within that context. So you put these two things together, the context of the thing itself, the change itself that we're talking about, say in terms of spirit dance, and then the context in which that's occurring could be the intersection of the weave, the environment, with our energy change, or simply the context of the standing energy weave that we have built, the guruch that we have built with our spirit dance. The change is happening in the context of a greater change. And so the first change that I'd like to talk about is Jag in the context of Jag. Now, for those that are interested in things Chinese, that's all the yangs. You know, if you want to know what hexagram it is, it's the 6 yang lines. Yeah. And in Armabella terminology, we called this persist. Now, I put a proviso on this that we did an awful lot of work on language as part of the Armabella effort. And the idea was to come up with language that didn't carry too much cultural baggage. When you're talking about the Book of Changes, you've got 64 separate changes that you need to come up with English-ish sounding words for. None of these words that we came up with as the Armabella movement, if you like, had anything like the amount of thought and effort that went into them compared to, for instance, English words like chilisti that we came up with. I'm personally far happier with chilisti than I am with the name of we give to this first change, which is persist.
Well, isn't it the case that in your in your I Ching book, you gave flavor words, but of which persist was just one of them? That's to try and give it more of a flavor of what that energy change is, rather than just going, this is persist, because it's not the whole picture, is it? So
so I stuck in a bunch of words, and I can say, for persist, I'll be using some of these. I call them inference words that give the kind of idea as a group. For instance, I'll not do this for everyone that we do, but I'll do it for persist. So the words were create, endure, firm, paragality, persevere, prop, stable, support, untiring. Those were words that we came up with to, as a group, give the idea of what the persist energy change is. And in many ways, although this isn't written in there, persist is very like that. In the idea of in a shamanic view of the world, energy not particularly changing is a change in itself. Energy constantly changes as the universe progresses from the creation through the generations in the extraordinary large and complex weave, the kind of orchestral weave, as Mickey would have referred to it, the idea of fundamental energy changes constantly interplaying with each other in the way that members of an orchestra would be producing sounds that constantly interplay with each other. Echoing through the generations, echoing through time, constantly generating the universe that we experience. And in some ways, the idea of time is not really a very shamanic concept, but we are, in a certain way, we're on a bow wave of that interplay. But if you start really looking into time and the nature of time, it's not as simple as, everybody everywhere is on the bow wave of one interplay. The work of Einstein and others kind of shows that there's more to it than that. And the shamanic intuition that the alpha and the omega, the start and the end, are just different aspects of the same thing, and that the universe, to quote Terence McKenna, seeks closure, is borne out in shamanic practice. It's this idea that this constant interplay of energy patterns in a universal, almightily complex weave, a large part of that weave sustains itself. So, for instance, if you're doing the round dance, if you're just moving around in a circle with your friends, the single thread of energy that hopefully runs through that circle, if everybody's up to scratch on their spirit dance, has a persistence in itself. If you just go around the circle, it's persisting and nothing is really changing in it, except it is a vibrant, alive thing. It's not a dead thing. And this is really, really important fundamental skill for spirit dance in general. The way I referred to it before is you want a standing pattern of energy that stands from the beginning to your end of your dance and influences the rest of the energy dance, sort of forms the backdrop on which all of the other changes play out. That is a key skill in spirit dance. That word endure, it endures. The weave of energy that you make endures, and it's not just existing at the point you are causing the changes in it, which is the point of your dance, if you like, the point that you're at in your dance. It persists and it kind of creates the backdrop of the rest of your dance. So one of the ways that, and supports the dance. So one of the ways that you can easily practice this in your groove is you start creating your energy thread, you start moving forwards, and then you just maybe start circling the groove. Now, sure, persist is now, as soon as you start circling, there are other changes involved, but let's just set that to one side. We're circling on a big arc in a large groove. If we're trying, I mean, you wouldn't do this. You want to have lots of change going on in your dance, but just say you are trying to understand the change of persist. You circle your groove once, and when you come back to the beginning, the path of the energy that you have started creating is still there. And so you're not really starting a new loop. You know what I mean? When you pass the finish line, it's not like you then start running another race. It's the same energy thread, and you just keep going. I don't know if you remember that game that used to be in the arcades, the Tron bikes out of that 80s movie. I do like 80s movies, well, not all of them. With that trail that comes out the back of the bike. Imagine a Tron bike game where you don't die if you crash into the wall that the bike's been producing, but actually you want to go into the back of the wall and keep following it. That kind of chain of energy.
Like Pac-Man, where you go off the left screen and you come up on the right one, and you just keep going and going and going for infinity.
Yeah, and being able to do that with the energy in your dance without Tyrak coming into play, that means that every single point in your dance, Numluch, now if you remember what we said about Numluch, it's that kind of the store of energy that's stored in the springiness of the body, the vessel-like body, which is supported by the other aspects of physical chelicity that we've talked about, refer to physical chelicity episodes. That Numluch always has stored energy and is always feeding. There's never a point when the Numluch hasn't got the energy stored, and there isn't a point at any point during the dance, even for a split second, when it isn't feeding that energy into the thread. So one of the ways that you can practice this is, as I said, you move around the groove, generating that thread of energy with your movements, but whatever your movements change to be, whatever other changes you're applying, they all serve to persist that existing thread. Do you follow what I mean? So a great way, maybe one that we haven't talked about, I mentioned this idea of putting together a sort of not simplified, but physically not too difficult kind of spirit dance that's based on Miki's, the spirit dance from Miki's tradition, as well as a few others that I've studied. There's a very fundamental technique in that spirit dance called throw, and that'd be nage in Japanese, called throw. And you sort of throw your hands in one direction or another, almost like you're tossing a ball, say, from your left hand to your right hand, and then from your right hand to your left hand. That and you can do it once or the other. So say the hand that's doing the throw is the right hand. That's coming over the top and tossing the ball into the upturned palm of the left hand. I'm just describing the movement. There is no ball. Don't start imagining a ball. Yeah. But you're constantly rotating from one hand to the other. And you can do nage in lots. You can do sort of a standing throw, would be tate nage. Or you can do a sort of downward throw, which is just called nage. But you can also do kind of a forward throw. And you can rotate those. You can do one after the other continuously, throwing from one hand to the other. And that's creating change in your forward movement. As you're moving forwards around the grove, that's creating change in your forward movement. It also creates a propensity, if you're not good at it, to kill the thread. Because at the end of each nage, at the end of each throw, there's a potential, which you don't want, for a stop, for a shard, for a tairak, yeah, which you definitely don't want. So the point is that as you throw, you've got a weave within a weave. Your energy pattern for the throw, for the nage, is touching, the end of it is touching onto that common thread that's always there and persisting it, yeah, and rolling along it. So the idea would be, so if I tried to describe it in physical terms, I'm walking forwards around my grove, and I'm throwing my left hand forwards along the line of the thread with the palm up. Simultaneously, or just afterwards, I'm throwing my right hand forwards with the palm down, so that the middle finger of each hand is pointing along the thread. It would come to the center of my body, probably the geographical center of my body, somewhere around what the Chinese would call the Zhongwan area. So for those that are into Tai Chi and stuff, this is not the Dantian. The entire world, believe it or not, does not revolve around the Dantian. It's around the sort of solar plexus sort of level, depending on how you're standing, how much your knees are bent and stuff like this. But the point is your forward momentum of your body and the forward transfer of that energy line, you're making this throwing movement. Left hand goes out, palm up. Right hand goes out, palm down over the top of it, as if I'm throwing, say, a beanbag from my right hand into my left palm. At the end of it, your hands are maybe a football width apart. But then at the end, you don't stop. You just turn your right hand over and you throw the left hand over the top of it, so that it's right palm up, left palm down, and then the next throw is left palm up, right palm down, and you're throwing your hand, and the middle finger of each hand is simultaneously with doing the nage technique, is simultaneously persisting the overall thread of your overall circular movement around your grove. Does that make some kind of sense? Am I explaining this okay, Joe?
It's going okay. I'm trying to visualize this exercise that you're talking about. Trying to, because so left hand. So my left hand comes over the top of my left shoulder, palm down, and my right hand is in front of me, palm up, and it's almost like I have the feeling of a ball, and the ball drops into the right hand. My right hand is palm up. Then the right hand drops down over the top of my right shoulder, and then the reverse happens. So right palm down in front of me drops onto my left hand, which is palm up, and then again left hand over the top, and so it's a constant sort of almost windmill spiral motion.
That's the idea. So clearly, there's an awful lot of.
I'm going to annoy you with this imaginary ball.
I'm not imagining a ball. I'm just trying to explain the movement. When I do it, now let's be very, very clear about this. When I do it, there is no imagination of any ball or anything. I'm just trying to show what the movement would be like. But obviously, you're in a state of chillicity. You're definitely not imagining a ball. If you're imagining a ball, you're not doing it right. That's it. But that's what it would look like. If you're throwing a beanbag from one hand to the other, that's what it would look like. That's it.
And when you get a handle on the other energies, it's like when the left hand comes up and the left hand comes down, there'd be a compression in the body, right? As the ball
should already be
drops
there.
Into the right, and then So you're still maintaining those fundamental movements and changes, that they're all there at the same time. Because, left arm up and then drops onto the right hand. Well, for me, that would be expand and then compress, and expand and compress as well, right?
Yeah, so that's the change that you're making.
And there's spiraling going on. There's spiraling, so there's squall and there's Gaia going on at the same time.
But that's not what we're talking about. But there are. So what I'm trying to give the idea of how the persist works is that there's something else going on as well. Yeah. You can do that movement and you can cut between it. You just do the throw movement, the nage movement, which incidentally in this butterfly dance idea, this sort of, let's call it the spirit dance for Damon's old age. Then with all this sort of things that I'm not going to need any hip replacements or anything like that. This is the kind of thing that is very, very easy to perform a spirit dance. This nage movement will be one of the basics in it, one of the basic techniques that I'm putting into it. The point is that, yes, there's squall and Gaia, there's Shuruganegel deck going on in that technique. There's a lot of it. But there's something else going on. That's just on a small scale. On the larger scale, both you, the microcosm, and the macrocosm, the area, the movement around the grove and the change that's going on there, you are still applying persist at the much larger scale, the bigger picture of the single energy thread that runs throughout the 2,000 iterations of the throwing action that you make. And it's typically at the end of that motion when the sense of persisting the existing energy thread is the most important. So effectively, the Skull and Gaia combination is the technique. It's the level 3 technique that you're applying, but the level 4 technique that you're applying with it, or you're using that level 3 technique to persist the single energy, standing energy thread throughout the grove at the level 4 energy level. Does that make sense?
Yes. It makes more sense.
Yeah. So, I mean, you don't have to do anything to do persist. You could just walk forwards, But if you're using other techniques, whether or not you're using, you could just walk forwards with your hands by your sides and walk around the grove and you say, I'm doing persist. Well, you might be and you might not be. Sticking in a technique, another dance technique like throw, like nage, would give you a better perception as to whether Tyrak is happening, whether you're cutting the overall thread of the dance or not. Does that make some kind of sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the reason for the secondary. Let's call this a secondary technique. The nage is a secondary technique. The persisting of the energy thread of the dance is the primary technique. And so you get this with shamanism. You get layers and layers of technique that often support each other. And then obviously there's a sort of next level of this, which is the nicer level of it. As you're moving around the grove, you pick up on a thread that's in the environment. You join together with it. We'll come on to that as a change in a bit. You join together with it. And then you're not persisting your thread. You're persisting a pre-existing thread that was already there in the environment, even before you arrived, or that comes into the environment as you arrive. Yeah. And so that would be a next level of, it's still level 4, but that would be a next, going into level 5, the sort of Mordok stuff that would be heading in that direction. Yeah. So this is the general idea of persist. It's how everything that you do, I gave nage as an example, but it could be anything that you're doing as part of your dance, any of your many, many myriad dance techniques. You are using the energy of those techniques and the numlach, the springiness and energy storage in the body that's constantly feeding the thread to persist the thread, so that as you get this skill with a simple technique, like say nage, you can then start applying the same skill into more complex kind of dance techniques. For instance, that we get in spirit animals. Yeah. Oh my goodness, Joe, we are going to be on level 4
this
for a long time.
This is crazy. I mean, we talked about back at the beginning of the episode. We said we would start off with the drum. Am I missing something, or did we just launch straight into the spirit dance? I think you said let's start with the drum, and then.
I don't know if I said anything about the drum, but basically the idea, if you're banging the drum, is that it's that skill of persist, is that skill of keeping the vibration going, so that one beat of the drum does not stand alone. The beating of the drum keeps the vibrations moving, and the next beat is sort of persisting the existing vibration rather than killing it and starting a new one. Does that make sense?
It does, and it strikes me as almost like incredibly complex, but also incredibly simple.
It's very
at
simple.
The same time.
Yeah.
You know, it's like you could really sit and think about it forever. What you're talking about, but also you could just zoom out and just go, actually, it's persisting. That's it.
Yeah,
right. Just keep
it's
it
easy
going.
to
just
sit and talk about.
Keep that thread going. Yeah.
It's easy to sit and talk about, but relatively easy. It's not easy to do. And the thing is, it's easy only in a theoretical baseline sense. Yeah. But in shamanism, we're not interested in baseline stuff. We overemphasize it. I mean, it is important, but actually it's the midline, the physical, and the top line, the energy levels, the spirit level, that are the practice that we need as civilized, miasmatic human beings. That's what we need. And this is not easy at those levels. And the more complex your spirit dance gets, the more techniques you incorporate, the persist change, which is why we're dealing with it first, it must be there, because otherwise your radar collapses. Your nature radar will collapse. The key thing is that you must have this skill of this change persist, irrespective of which dance technique or which energy change you're applying in your dance. The persist must be there at all times. Otherwise, you end up with a rubbish, choppy radar for nature. So we want to keep a nice, rich, vibrant weave in a way. You imagine you're weaving you want to think of the problem with Tyrak. You can do an analogy. You're creating this beautiful tapestry of, I don't know, some kind of beautiful pattern or something. And then at the end of every row or every stitch or whatever, you take out a pair of scissors and just start chopping at random. It's not gonna be good for your tapestry, and it's really not going to be good for your guruk in your spirit dance either. Yeah. Now Tyrak has its place, as we've said, and we've talked about it a bit, and we'll talk about it more and what its place is. But that's the fundamental, and I would say that out of all of these changes, this skill, this persist skill, gets more and more important to the shaman as they progress. It gets, as your spirit dance gets richer, the persist skill gets harder and harder and harder, because your energy changes are faster, they're more complex, and they have the tendency to either end up with far too much or far too little energy as their natural consequence. If you think of the three realms, the creative realm is generating that energy. Numlock is part of the creative realm in this aspect. Then your actual physical dance is the continuative realm. It's the trunk of the trees. But the receptive realm, that should become the raw material for what comes next. If you want to cycle the three realms, you just dump stuff into it and cut off. And then it doesn't become the raw material for what comes next. You have to then use a lot of kindle to pick it up again. And that ends up with a very inefficient, first of all, an inefficient spirit dance if you do too much of it, but also a very inefficient nature radar in terms of we're trying to pick up on the ways in which the weave within the environment is intersecting with the weave that we're creating in the dance. It ends up like a strobe light or something like that, where you getting little bits of inclination of what's going on, but it's not a beautiful full beam headlight type of, type of exposition of the natural energy patterns. It's chopped up into little chunks and not very detailed ones at that. So I guess I'm trying to think of analogies here. You imagine a birthday cake and you're trying to figure out what the birthday cake looked at, but you've only been shown half a candle that's chopped in half. You don't know what. Do you follow what I mean? Yeah. That kind of a problem. So, with all of these changes, there is a kind of yi, as we've said in Chinese, a kind of 2-in-1 they mutually support each other. So, for instance, Jag supports Meld, Meld supports Jag, then Torrent supports Kindle, Kindle supports Torrent. They work in these pairs, Tatsu Totsu, as Miki called it. They work in these pairs. Well, so do the more detailed changes. They also work in pairs. And obviously, on the next episode, we're going to talk about Yield, which is the where Persist is like Jag Jag, Yield is like Meld Meld. And it's
all
the
broken lines.
Exact opposite, the mutually supportive partner of Persist. So the partner has an effect on what can fall out of the change. So the kind of aspects that can fall out of the change, typically, I mean, any change can fall out of one change, another change can fall out of another. But what experience has shown is that certain changes fall out of certain other changes. You think again in the cycle of the three realms, the creative realm generates a change within the manifest realm, and the upper world generates a change within the middle world, Earth, where we live now, the present moment, the temporal world. And then that has repercussions that are taken up by the underworld, if you want to call it that, in terms of shamanic, the ways of talking about shamanism. But then what it should be is that result that falls out in the underworld is immediately picked up by the creative realm again. That's how you keep the cycle going. And so although any energy change can fall out of any energy change, and it's interesting to explore that, there are certain energy changes that are more likely to fall out. And in terms of Persist, the by far the most likely energy change to fall out of Persist is the one that we're calling meet, in M-E-E-T, not M-E-A-T, M-E-E-T. In Arma Belgic terminology. And that is when you come upon something. That's a change that happens when you come upon something. Now, I said one of the things you can do with Persist is persist an energy change that's going on within the environment. Well, that very first change as you come upon that change is very, very important for your spirit dance technique. You are persisting your thread, you come upon a change. It may be just your arms out and you collide with a tree. It can be as dramatic as that. And then the tree puts some sort of impetus into your dance, whatever you're going to do. That's a bit dramatic, but it can be far more subtle than that. And usually is. And
so if you're constantly persisting with something, you are eventually going to meet something that has resistance to your persist.
Not necessarily resistance, but you will come upon something. And, you like the wild run, or that thing where I said, you walk from one place to another and it's in a state of chillicity. Do I really need to say that we have to be doing all of this in a state of chillicity, not thinking, not expecting what's coming next? As a matter of fact, as you move through life, you have a kind of life thread as you move through life. If you persist, you will come across something. If you persist your energy stream, you will come across another energy stream that perhaps you yourself did not make. That is where this change from the persist to meet happens. This is the most likely change to come out of persist. If you're in a state of chillicity, if you're not in a state of chillicity, then this is not the most likely change to come out of it, because the change that comes out of it will be one that you yourself made, rather than the changes in the environment. Yeah. And so this is really a key skill, because you do not want meat to turn into Tyrach. Yeah. You don't
it's how you deal with that. It's how you deal with what you come across, right?
Exactly. And that meat, as part of persist, shouldn't kill the persist in your spirit dance. You don't want it to kill it, but you do want to pick up on it. You do want to pick up on that change, because instantly that will make your spirit dance more interesting. And so you want to think about it's like an idea. Meet is like the idea of joining together, almost like welcome. Yeah. So we talked about some patrons came over and we did some spirit dance up in the woods at Launceston, and I think I talked about Emily getting her cardigan snagged on a thorn on a tree, and she did meet perfectly. The thorn pulled on the cardigan, pulled her around, and it released. Yeah, because she didn't resist it. It was a new thing that she encountered as part of her persist, and rather than allowing it to tire-rack, it was just the environment saying, "Hey, there's another way to persist this energy thread that you've been creating, given the context that you have met this kind of encounter." So it's like, the idea is not like something resisting you. It's not like walking up against a toll barrier or something like that. It's something's introduced and you want to meet it in a welcoming kind. Oh, thank you. Yeah, that's the feeling. Oh, thank you. Thank you to nature for giving me this.
Could you think of it as like you are in a river, bobbing down the river, and you are moving down this path, and you come across, there's a rock in your way. There's a log floating by or whatever, and you continue to persist, but you're meeting these various things that are coming down the river, and it's just how you navigate through them without cutting. So you could smash into the rock, you could smash into the log, but it's how you maneuver yourself past them.
It's a very dramatic example, but yes, it's an example. That's a potential threat of tire-rack there. You're going to hit the rock, right? What I'm really talking about is those eddies and whirls that are going round the rock. You encounter one of those, and it wants to send you off in a slightly different direction. There's an energy thread that wants to send you somewhere else, make you do something else. Then when you meet that, you want to join together with it as part of your persist. So this idea of meat falling, the meat energy change falling out of the persist energy change, but also joining together with it, welcoming it, and actually they persist. So the meat is, rather than sort of a bad way to deal with the meat change, is to see it as a stop or a problem to be overcome. A good way to deal with the meat change is to be very accepting and welcoming of it, and almost like it is there to help you. That's what nature's there for. When you're a shaman, nature is almost the exact opposite of what it is in exoteric religion. In exoteric religion, nature is a dark, scary place where, nature is red in tooth and claw. That's what exotericists believe about nature. Heavy-duty exotericists. What shamans were more like, nature is nurturing. Nature is the teacher. Nature is there to help us. So when we meet a different energy thread from the one we are persisting, the ideal in that situation is for us to use that energy thread as part of our persistence of our thread. Or is it nature's thread? We then start taking our persisted energy thread and threading it into nature's thread, join together. So it's a fundamental skill for spirit dancers. You're moving around your grove in very simplistic terms. If there are obstacles in your grove, if there are things to trip over, if nature trips you up, if nature snags you, if a tree gets in your way, if a bush gets in your way, don't see those things as problems. I think I've said before, if you do it, you come to a nice grove, you haven't been there before, there's a bunch of nettles or other stingy plants or brambles or whatever. When I was young, practicing my shamanism, I'd probably clear them out the way before I start my spirit dance. Now I sort of see those things as learning benefits. They're things whose energy I can meet as part of my dance, encounter, happen upon, join together with, and see where richness. We go together extra as part richness. Of our persist. Exactly. So that's the most common thing that can fall out of persist, but there are many, many other changes that can fall out of it. The next one is, sorry, Joe, did you have something?
I was going to say, I'm kind of wrestling with a question, and it's like, without persist, you're not doing anything. So on some level, is what we're talking about something that would just happen naturally to somebody on their shamanic path, say in the spirit dance, if you're doing level 4 spirit dance correctly, you will be persisting, full stop. And what we're doing here is trying to understand a little bit more about the component
it's post-analysis. Yeah, it's post-analysis. Yeah. The issue is
because it just seems obvious. What I'm struggling with is like what you're talking about just seems completely obvious on a certain level. If you have to persist in what you're doing, otherwise you're not doing anything.
Yeah. So yes and no. I mean, it seems very simple until you actually try to do it. That's incredibly difficult. So that idea of meat, that's not obvious. The meat falling out of the persist. The thing is, what I see, first of all, what in terms of basic mistakes that I see in people trying to do spirit dance. First of all, people who are very bad at spirit dance, you see an awful lot of Tyrak in that. And so those guys are not going to meet anything. They just keep, burling on. Because, you think when you talk about Tyrak in terms of our own internal movement, or cutting our own thread. But if you don't have that skill of meat falling out of persist, then when you come across an energy pattern within the environment, you're just going to spell straight through it, unknowing, unrecognizing, and you're going to Tyrak its energy stream, not yours, its. So that's kind of a next level.
Yeah.
That's a next level of problems with over-Tyraking everything.
That's the macrocosm, isn't it? The environment is the macrocosm.
Right. That's right. So here you can think that the next most likely change that comes out of it, and it is a desirable change. I'm saying these are likely. This one is also likely and desirable, is what the one we called in Umbrella, we called it unite. And what this is exactly that. You meet a different energy pattern within the environment with your thread, your pre-existing thread that's standing throughout your dance. You happen upon it, then you welcome it, and you bring it together with yours, or the changes to bring it together with yours.
Yeah.
In kind of fellowship or union, you hold in common with it. It's like you imagine that you haven't encountered a random energy pattern out there. You've encountered a member of your close family of energy patterns. You achieve a bringing together, a concord, a cooperation with nature in this union, in this uniting. And that's a desirable change that falls out of the meat. So one of the ways to think about this is there is some slight amount of kindle going on in unite as opposed to just meat. Just meat is just the action of welcoming change with the changes within the environment. As simple as you get your foot snagged on a bramble or something that's going across the ground, and it sort of tries to trip you. The different ways you can deal with that. You could do a quick hop skip with a sort of Tyrak movement. You would overcome it, and then you've sort of cut that energy pattern that the nature has created for you. But much better is to allow whatever turning momentum it puts on your body to turn you into a more beautiful, conducive movement of energy within your dance. But that meeting is the actual change itself. The uniting is where you take that energy pattern that's been given to you by nature, and you hold it in common with your thread. You bring it together. And because you're doing something slightly active here, there is a bit of kindle going on, asach, within the microcosm. Do you follow what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's a sort of separate change. It's very closely related to meat, and it's a very desirable change, in my opinion, for spirit dance. I guess for any shamanic technique, but particularly for spirit dance, because this is the key to understanding what shamanism is all about. You are not trying to teach nature. Nature is teaching you. You're putting yourself in a position where you're taking nature as your teacher, and any of these threads that nature introduces into your dance, to me, they are not a problem when you meet them, when you have the meet energy change. They are an opportunity to hold in common, to cooperate, to hold in fellowship with nature. And this is a fantastic way of looking at persist, because if you're not persisting, you're not going to be experiencing these things. You're not going to be meeting them. When you do meet them, if you don't join together with them, welcome them, then you don't have the opportunity for that better energy change unite, or that better, I mean, from the point of view of learning, to do beautiful energy changes that hold in fellowship with the energy change that nature has just given you. And you can do this. I mean, this comes up so often, this meet and unite in tree climbing. Again, put disclaimers on this. Nobody on this podcast is asking you to go tree climbing. It is something that I've done a lot of in my life, and it is very, very dangerous. Some of the things that don't seem to be very dangerous in life are actually some of the most dangerous things there are. And as I've said before, the worst injuries I've had in my years and years of shamanic practice, I don't know how many years it is since 1985, are associated with tree climbing. So I'm not encouraging you to do it. There's no need to do it. I'm just saying that you imagine as you're climbing through the branches, probably doing it quite quickly if you're good at it, you're going to be constantly meeting energy changes that, as a person who spends most of your life either sitting or walking along the ground, you don't come across a lot. I mean, I know some of our cousins, or close cousins, friends, chimpanzees and bonobos and stuff are very comfortable with this kind of thing. You're going to be encountering stuff in terms of the flexibility that wood has, and in terms of the rich weave of the branches, depending on what's going on with the tree and the wind and all that kind of stuff. You're going to be meeting stuff constantly that's very unfamiliar to you, which is a great from a shamanic point of view. If you're spirit dancing among the branches, that's the ideal kind of thing. If you don't unite with that, if you're not able to do that and you haven't developed that skill, preferably on the ground, you're going to end up with injuries like me. That's it. I was very, I got into tree climbing far too early in my spirit dance progression. That's probably the best way to put it. And so what I'm saying is the ideal for this is you use a tiny bit of Kindle. Remember, this has also got to be done in a state of chillicity. Use a tiny bit of Kindle to bring together your thread and the thread of energy that's in the environment in a cooperative kind of way, in a concordant kind of way. It's a kind of union, but it's sort of a cooperation between you and nature. So that's the next most likely change to fall out of Persist.
It's 37 years, by the way, since 1985.
All right, okay. So a little while. Little while. Yeah.
But look, something that really strikes me from this episode now is not only have we talked about Persist, we've also talked about Yield very briefly as being the other 2-in-1 or whatever we want to call it. But you've also mentioned Meet and Unite as two more energy changes. And so things are going to get extremely complex really quickly. And one thing that springs to mind is that as a general map, or as like something to kind of put these energy changes into a little bit more of a perspective to follow the routes that we're talking about, so to speak, is your book that you wrote, that Armabella I Ching book. Now, if we gave the proviso that, don't view it as the I Ching, but view it as a map and a way of kind of organizing these episodes, would you say that that's a pretty good book to get hold of, really?
For reference,
without plugging it.
If you want to. I mean, there's two versions of it, right? For reference, there's the Western White Tiger I Ching, which is a sort of martial artsy leaning version of it. And then there's the actual Armabella version of it, which uses some fairly esoteric stuff that we developed for Armabella. There are two versions of the same book. And here's how I would look at that book. If you're practicing your spirit dance and you want a bit of a reference, having practiced your spirit dance, if there's something that came up and you're treating it in that way, then sure, it can be a useful tool for somebody who is a practitioner and is already practicing to then go back and do some baseline post-analysis on what they have done already. it can be a useful tool in that way. For a way of organizing the energy changes, I'm not going to be following it on the podcasts. So it could be used like that. And I am indeed starting with the first two changes that occur in the I Ching, in the traditional I Ching, which is persist and yield. But I'm going to go off path pretty quickly in these series of episodes. So it's up to you, really, whether you find it useful or not. But
for instance, what we've talked about here, in terms of we've talked in detail about one of the changes, but it's about the offshoots, isn't it? And yes, of course, it's a rational book, isn't it? It's like it's an encyclopedia rather than
baseline book.
Exactly what you said. It's a baseline book, but I don't think that divides it of merit to what we're talking about. And I think just as a way of, because I mean, hell, we're going to have. This is one change. There's 64 of these to go over, if indeed we're going to go over the 64. So, and each one of those is going to, then we're going to talk about the other changes which fall out of those. And so I'm just thinking the book provides you with a nice sort of map.
Sure.
With everything you've said in mind, just it's got to be used in conjunction with your practice if you're wanting to post-rationalize.
The book was not created for spirit dance specifically. It follows pretty much the traditional order of the 64 hexagrams in the traditional I Ching. What I'm going to do on the podcast, or what we're going to do on the podcast, is introduce changes in an order that's much more applicable to learning spirit dance at level 4. So we're going to be skipping a whole bunch of stuff that's, I mean, we'll cover everything, but I want to do it in context, in a kind of building context. Now, I'm quite happy to start in the traditional place because it's a no-brainer starting with persist and yield. That's a no-brainer to me. But the traditional order in which the rest of them occur is not necessarily the best in supporting somebody who's trying to take their spirit dance to level 4. And we're going to introduce them in a different order that's going to help more in that way. That's my idea with it.
Brilliant. If somebody wants to get hold of this book, what do they search for on Amazon? I know it's on there.
I've no idea, mate. It's a very long time since I've dealt with this book. So it's there's the Western White Tiger I Ching. That's one version, and the other one
and
is
it's not by Damon Smith. It's by you've called it by
Changes of Armabella. Well, it isn't by me, is it? It's
I know, but like just so people know they're getting the right book.
Publishers don't understand by nature. They don't understand that. Yeah, you've got to fill in the boxes, name, surname. Yeah, Fushi's an ancient, legendary Chinese character. Yeah, so you just got to fill these things in for publishers. They force you down those lines. But I don't know what's happening with it. I don't know if we get any kickback if we sell a copy or not. I would have to look into that. But if you're wondering whether to become a patron or to buy the book, I'd encourage you to become a patron. That helps us a lot more immediately. I don't even know if we get anything from selling copies of those books anymore. I would have to look into it. To be honest, it was done so long ago, I have no idea how it works. So I would have to look into what's happening with it at the moment.
I mean, from a baseline perspective, it's a beautiful looking book. The Changes of Armabella. I don't have the Western White Tiger one. I've got the Changes of Armabella. And it's just a black book with that lovely red flower on the front, and that's it.
Indeed.
But I would personally recommend people just pick it up.
Yeah, I remember that.
It's not a plug, but yeah.
That thing, that sort of red flower thing, that was supposed to be the six... the lines of the 6 lines in the hexagrams, like morphing one into the other. That was supposed to be a representation of that. Every time that we look back at Armabella, I'm kind of shocked how much work we did on it at the time, because it was a long time ago now, and I have no recollection until I research it.
It's so comprehensive, is that system. I think that was peak Damon, in my opinion. You've done an awful lot of stuff, and you've even done a lot of stuff before my time. But Armabella was the pinnacle.
Yeah, well, I'm not happy being degenerate Damon at the moment. That's I'm quite happy with that. I'm enjoying it. So So
but
basically,
I like how you are desperately trying not to sell your book. It's just,
it's not that I'm not trying.
I know.
We start this podcast. If this was the Heretics podcast, I'm more than happy for people to run off and buy the book. But this isn't the Heretics podcast. This is the Woven Energy podcast. We set out to try and help people become shamans. That was our goal in life. That's what we set out to do. And I would much rather that people come to understand what we're talking about through practice, through doing it. And ideally, my ideal dream would be that I know a lot of our existing listeners, especially our patrons, have listened to all the episodes like multiple times. Thanks ever so much, guys. It's remarkable because we're talking about, just on Woven Energy, we're talking about close to 60 hours of listening, and on Heretics there's even more. And listen to those all multiple times. It's an incredible investment from your lives as our listeners. Thank you ever so much. And, we've given a lot of practical stuff for people to have a go at. And I'd much prefer that you understand it through your body and through your spirit and through actually doing it than going and reading a book about it and analyzing it on the baseline. But if you find that the book supports your practice, then great. I mean, this is how it supported my practice and why I spent so much of my life studying the I Ching. It supported my practice in terms of my spirit dance had got pretty rich by about, I don't know, mid-90s, something like that. It got pretty rich. And it got to the point where I was thinking, which changes am I not engaged in? Which changes are out there in the universe that I haven't yet incorporated into my spirit dance? I mean, one of my issues was being from a martial arts background. There was an awful lot of stuff from martial arts in my spirit dance. But there are other lines of life than martial arts. I'd started learning Teodori from Miki's tradition. I'd started learning some of the other kind of dancing religion type moves from other Shinshukyo as well. I'd done a bunch of the Malaysian type of stuff. I had some stuff that came in through Kempo that wasn't necessarily all martial arts stuff, more traditional Japanese dance-related things with martial elements to them. And so there was a few different traditions. The real issue for me was that this is a big universe. There's an awful lot of stuff going out there. What changes do I not know about? What changes have I not incorporated into my admittedly already fairly extensive spirit dance? As I had by that time decided that spirit dance was going to be my not shamanic technique, but portfolio of technique. What other changes are out there? And that's why I spent so long on the I Ching, is to find those changes that I didn't have covered off. It was that sort of a aspect that I was interested in it for. What do I not know about? That was my use of it. So if you're in that position, then great. You're probably waiting for us to get a bit further on in this podcast if you're in that position. Fantastic. So yeah, I'll just leave it to you guys. That's the point. I don't want to encourage or discourage, but just, if you listen to
what we'll try and do, David, what we'll try and do is we'll create a rush for the book, and then it'll become like one of those really hard to find sort of £500, £1,000, and then it starts becoming this sort of desirable novelty.
We should republish it under the Woven Energy. What about the changes, the Woven Energy book of changes? How about that?
The Woven Energy book of changes.
And then we might actually know what happens to it. We might actually know what happens.
Do that, but keep that same cover. It's fantastic.
The Arabella cover, yeah.
Because it's just black and the spine. It sticks out. It sticks out in the bookshelf because it's just a black spine. It has nothing on it. It's a really smart book. We probably
haven't got the files for that anymore, mate. Almost certainly don't, but we could recreate it. So yeah, but I mean, if we did republish it, then at least we would know what happens to when somebody buys a copy of it. At the moment, I'm not clear on that.
Do it. We'll update people. Yeah. We'll update you on the next episode or the next episode after that. But I think that's definitely a good idea. Let's get it out there.
Yeah, sure. What we could do is put way more disclaimers in the front of it than we've got at the moment. We'll get half the book full of disclaimers.
Yeah. Uncle Damon style. I remember in the very first paragraph, you're like, no armchair ratiocination. That's what you used, that phrase.
So if you've looked at the Tao Te Ching, the most famous Taoist text in the world, or pre-Taoist text in the world, it starts with the name that can be named is not the eternal name. And that is one of the best disclaimers to put in the front of any book. Because what that says is, there's no point in reading this book. That's it. That's the first line of the book. It translated into English paraphrase, there's no point in reading this book. I love that. I love that about the Tao Te Ching. So yeah, we'll put that kind of a disclaimer in the front of it. But we aren't finished on Persist, I'm afraid. But we have got to like an hour and something here. So
are we not finished?
I'm sorry, mate, we're not. Shall we? I did say this was going to take a while. Shall we do a fun episode? Let's do a super lightweight, fun one to stop people gnawing their arms off or something. And then we'll get back to Persist in the one after, and then hopefully quite quickly get on to Yield. Does that sound okay?
To Yield. Okay. Yeah.
I think we've probably got another half hour to 45 minutes left on Persist.
Okay, fantastic. Because then we can finish Persist and start Yield then, and these episodes I will label them, and they'll probably start melding into one series. So yeah, fantastic. All right then. So shall we leave it there, Durban?
Let's do it. Thanks, mate.
Okay, fantastic. So thanks a lot for listening, guys. You can head to patreon.com/wovenenergy to support us over there. You can also leave a review on your podcast platforms. It really helps us get this podcast in front of more people, at least the light-hearted episodes, maybe not this one. Thanks ever so much for listening. We'll see you next time.
All the best, guys.